Matilde was no longer sure when exhaustion became her constant companion. It had been so long since she had worked for the Green family that it felt like the house itself had become part of her body. The furniture, the smell of food, the echo of footsteps on the long marble stairs, everything felt like a second home. A home where she had never really lived. She simply existed there, like a shadow that was always present but never seen. The woman who cleaned, who cooked, who organized the house so everything would be perfect for the Greens. It was no longer a surprise that they didn't even notice her presence, as if Matilde was just another piece of furniture. She woke up every day at 5:30 a.m., even before the sun rose, and was already on her feet, broom in hand, sweeping the corners of the house while her employers were still under the soft sheets, far from the worries of the world. Jonathan Green, the boss, was a successful man, the head of one of the biggest companies in the city. His wife, Allison, was a charming woman who always seemed to have a perfect life. They lived in a huge mansion, full of everything anyone could ever want. A big house, with endless hallways, spacious rooms, and vast gardens. Matilde had grown accustomed to it all, but she never got used to the emptiness she felt. She had nothing. It was as if her life was an endless cycle of futile efforts made for others, to ensure the comfort of others. Her children were in a public school far away, and she hardly saw them. And when she did, she always had that feeling that she couldn't give them what they deserved, what she deserved too. She and her husband, Roberto, barely had enough money to cover the bills at the end of the month. Matilde's dreams faded day by day, like the drops of sweat that ran down her forehead as she worked non-stop, always with a smile on her face for the employers, always with a kind word. But inside her, frustration grew. She no longer saw any point in continuing like this. Matilde began to feel a deep emptiness, one that seemed to expand with each passing day. What was she doing there? Why all this effort? For what was this life of sacrifices, of chasing crumbs, while the Greens had everything? Everything she would never have? She felt like an insignificant piece, a tiny cog in the massive and powerful machinery of their lives. She who spent her days trying to please, was never recognized, never treated as an equal. Each time she cleaned the children's rooms, the luxury beds, the expensive toys scattered on the floor, Matilde felt more anger. She imagined what it would be like to live that life, to walk from one side to the other without worrying about money, about food, about anything. If only she had the chance to be seen, to be recognized. If only she had something more, something beyond hard work and the daily struggle for survival. It was on one of these mornings that she felt a snap, as if something inside her had broken. She was in Jonathan's room, arranging the clothes in the closet, when, accidentally, she saw a used condom thrown there, in the corner of the trash can. An idea struck her like lightning, fast, sharp. She stared at the object for a long time, not knowing what to think. But it was at that moment that the seed was planted. If I could, I'd have a chance. The chance was simple, but bold. If she could get pregnant by Jonathan Green, her future would be secured. His child would have the power to change her life, her financial condition. She could escape from all of this. Maybe not with the life the Greens had, but with something more. Something that would take her out of the darkness of invisibility and place her in the light. Something that might give her a piece of the life she had always dreamed of. But how would she do it? The idea seemed absurd, almost unbelievable, but the thought persisted. Matilde found herself dreaming of a future where she would be someone, where her children would have the life she could not offer. And for that, she was willing to do whatever it took. After that thought entered her mind, Matilde couldn't get rid of it. The simple act of looking at that condom, not even knowing what she was doing, was like a spark that ignited a flame inside her. Suddenly, the future seemed clearer than ever. She knew that, if she succeeded, she could have everything she had always wanted: stability, security, and a better life for her children. But for that to happen, she needed to act quickly. Every step had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes. The first challenge would be getting Jonathan's used condom. It wouldn't be easy. He, like any man in his position, had a private life surrounded by security and distance. But Matilde had something others didn't: patience and a silent, almost imperceptible cunning. She knew her best chance would come from the small cracks in the routine. Jonathan was a busy man, and Allison, his wife, was always involved in her own life's tasks. They wouldn't suspect someone like Matilde, the quiet maid, who did everything with a smile on her face and never caused any trouble. To them, she was invisible. In the following days, Matilde began to observe Jonathan and his wife's schedules more closely. He would occasionally travel for business, staying away for a few days. This would be a good start. His wife, Allison, spent long periods at the spa or attending social events, and Matilde knew that when the couple wasn't around, she would have the freedom to act. She also began studying the house in more detail, like a strategist preparing for battle. Jonathan's routine, his trips, the meeting times, everything began to fall into place like a puzzle. The idea of waiting for a time when he would be absent seemed to be the key. When Jonathan left for his business trips, she would have the chance to act. The next step was subtler, more careful. Matilde began to look for small moments that would go unnoticed, where she could discreetly approach Jonathan's bathroom without being seen. During the mornings, when he was busy with his video conferences, she would find a window of opportunity to go into the bathroom and observe the details. Each day, she studied the environment more carefully, where the condoms were discarded, where he left them. Nothing could escape her. Over time, she realized there was more she had to do. She needed to ensure the pregnancy wouldn't just be a possibility, but a certainty. She needed to make sure everything would happen exactly as planned. For that, Matilde began to prepare herself physically, with more care and attention. She knew that, even though it was a short-term plan, the consequence of not getting pregnant would be a failure. But she wasn't willing to fail. Never. She also began thinking about how to maintain appearances. It couldn't be easy to discover. Matilde imagined Jonathan's face, Allison's reaction. If they knew what she was plotting, they would never suspect her, of course, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. It would take more than just the chance of getting pregnant. She would need a story, a plausible excuse, something that would convince not just them, but herself, in case she was confronted. There were moments when Matilde felt a fleeting doubt, a tiny bit of regret. Was she doing the right thing? Would the price be too high? But she quickly pushed those thoughts away. The desire to change her life and give her children what she never had was stronger than any fear. She wanted more. She deserved more. In the following days, Matilde continued her work as always, but her eyes were sharper. Every detail in the house seemed to take on new importance. Her steps were quieter, more calculated. She was preparing for what would be the defining moment. And when the day came, she would be ready. Jonathan Green, her boss, would never imagine that the woman who had always been just another employee was now the key player in a plan that would change the course of her life. The plan was already in motion. She just needed one more small push to put everything into action. The opportunity finally came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Jonathan Green was out of town for an important business meeting in Chicago, and Allison, his wife, had scheduled an entire day at the spa as usual. The house was quiet, like the perfect setting for what Matilde had in mind. The clock read 9 o'clock a.m., and she knew the window of time was short, no more than a few hours before everything would be at risk. Matilde was already prepared. Over the past few days, she had gathered enough information about Jonathan and Allison's schedules, and now, finally, the moment had arrived. The strategy was simple. She needed to be quick, discreet, and most importantly, no one could suspect anything. While she was in Jonathan's bathroom, she felt her heart beat loudly. She wasn't nervous, but there was a tension in her body that she hadn't felt before. Everything was about to change. It was now or never. She grabbed the key she had to Jonathan's personal drawers, a key he would never suspect she had. With the key in hand, she went to the closet where he kept his personal items, rummaged through the drawers, and there, she found what she was looking for. A used condom, carelessly discarded. It was exactly what she needed. From that point on, nothing could go wrong. Matilde took the condom with the utmost care, as if it were a precious item, and placed it in a small plastic bag she had brought from home. Every movement was meticulously planned, every breath controlled. She felt the weight of what she was doing. It wasn't just a physical act. It was a strategic move, an attempt to guarantee a radical change in her life. She took a deep breath and stepped away from the bathroom, the plastic bag in hand. Now, she just needed to ensure that everything would unfold as planned. It wasn't just about the moment she was creating, but about the future she was about to forge. With the condom in hand, she began to think of everything she would need to do next. She would need to make sure no one suspected anything, that the plan wouldn't be discovered. She knew her life in the greenhouse was about to change, but she didn't yet know how it would unfold. In the following days, Matilde kept up her usual routine, without making any moves that could attract attention. She knew that, even though she had taken the first step, there was still much to be done. The secret was well hidden, and now she had to act with precision. She began paying attention to every detail, taking care of her diet, and preparing physically, because she knew that the success of her plan depended not only on conception, but on how she could sustain the lie long enough. It was with this awareness that Matilde realized the true cost of everything she was doing. It wasn't just the pregnancy at stake, it was the need to keep up the perfect facade, to ensure that no one suspected her intentions. She began imagining the questions that would arise when the pregnancy became noticeable. How would she explain it? How would she keep the scandal from ruining not just her life, but also the Greens? But these concerns didn't stop her. Not now. She was determined. Whatever happened, she would make it work. She had to make it work. In the days that followed, Matilde kept her contact with Jonathan and his wife the way she always had. Always polite. Always with that smile on her face that everyone expected to see. But inside, a war was being waged. She knew what she was doing, and she knew that every day was one more chance for the secret to be revealed. But fear didn't paralyze her. On the contrary, it pushed her forward. The more she thought about the future, the more she felt she was close to achieving something big. Finally, after a few weeks of tension, she was sure. She was pregnant. The pregnancy confirmed the success of the plan, but at the same time, it brought with it a new kind of fear. There was no turning back now. What had once seemed like a game, a distant possibility, was now a reality. Her belly was starting to grow, and the changes were visible. She knew that the moment to reveal her secret was approaching, and the life she had known, the life she thought was unchangeable, was about to be destroyed. She began rehearsing in her mind the words she would say. How would she tell the Greens? How would she explain what had happened? And, more importantly, how would she maintain the appearance that everything was as expected? After all, no one could suspect. But above all, Matilde had one certainty. The secret was safe for now. And that secret, in some way, made her feel powerful. It was as if, for the first time, she was in control. And with that, the future seemed to be in her hands. Matilde could no longer hide her belly. She had tried to keep her movements discreet, covering the pregnancy with loose clothing, but soon it became impossible. The house, so full of details and small curious eyes, now felt like a stage for the drama that was coming. When her husband Roberto asked, concerned, if she shouldn't tell the Greens about the pregnancy, Matilde just smiled, without answering. It wasn't the time to turn back, not yet. She had already taken the first step, and now she was about to take the second, a step that would change her life forever. The day she had feared arrived with the return of Jonathan and Allison from a business trip. The house was quiet, but inside Matilde, there was a storm. Everything she had done, all the lies she had fed, would now have to be revealed. There would be no turning back. She knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Her relationship with the Greens would never be the same, neither with Jonathan, nor with Allison, nor with the house. It was on a hot Tuesday afternoon that the encounter happened. Jonathan was in his office, as usual, when Matilde entered the living room, where Allison was sitting with a cup of tea. The tension seemed insurmountable. The woman, always so polite, so courteous, now felt like a burden to herself. She had never imagined she would be capable of doing what she was about to do. But now, in the face of the great revelation, nothing seemed to matter anymore. Matilde, what happened? Allison asked. Noticing her employee's strange demeanor, as if something was about to break, Matilde took a deep breath. Her voice felt muffled, but she knew there was no time for hesitation. When she looked into Allison's eyes, she realized that everything she was about to say would change everything. I'm pregnant. Ma'am, the silence was deafening. Allison looked at her as if she didn't understand. There was a look of disbelief on her face, as if she couldn't comprehend the magnitude of it. Time seemed to stop, and Matilde felt an overwhelming weight on her shoulders. But how is that possible? Allison's voice trembled, still in disbelief. Matilde wasn't sure if the pain in her chest was guilt or fear of what was to come, but she knew she had to keep going. There was no turning back. I know this might seem strange, but the truth is, I'm pregnant with Jonathan's child. For a moment, Allison stood frozen, like a statue. The world around her seemed to disappear. The woman standing before her, who had always been just another employee, was now revealing something that felt like a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was reality, and as difficult as it was to believe, there was no turning back. Jonathan walked into the room at the exact moment Matilde spoke the words that seemed to echo through the entire universe. The shock on his face was immediate. He looked from Allison to Matilde, then to his wife, with a vacant look, as if he didn't know what to do. There was no anger there, no astonishment, just a horrible stillness, as if he were trying to process the enormity of it. What's going on? Jonathan's voice finally sounded, low and lifeless. Matilde looked at him, not knowing what to say, but now, there was no turning back. She couldn't hide anymore, not even from herself. The truth was out, exposed, raw, and painful. Allison abruptly stood up, her hands trembling. Did you know about this, Jonathan? Did you know Matilde was carrying your child? Jonathan hesitated. He looked at Matilde, then at his wife, and finally said, his voice firm, as if he were making a decision, I didn't know any of this. But now, we can't hide what happened. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the air were charged with the weight of everything that had transpired up to that point. For a moment, Matilde felt powerless. Her life was on the line. Everything she had done could come crashing down at any moment. But she also knew that nothing would ever be the same. This was her chance to change everything. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions, arguments, and heavy decisions. The Green family, with all its power and influence, began to fracture. Matilde's pregnancy, which initially seemed to be the path to her freedom, now put everything at risk. Jonathan's reputation was under threat, and his relationship with Allison deteriorated each day. They didn't know what to do with Matilde, with the pregnancy, with the children she was expecting. The arrival of the twins was an event that changed everything even more. Matilde's pregnancy wasn't what she had imagined. It wasn't just one or two children. They were two conjoined boys. The impact of this was devastating, not just for Matilde, but for everyone around her. The news wasn't just shocking, it was a nightmare for Jonathan and his wife's public image. The complexity of the birth of Matilde's children forced the Green family to make decisions they never imagined would be necessary. Matilde, who had thought she had found the key to her freedom, was now facing a new challenge. Her children, who had been her ticket out, had become her greatest burden. She had played the game, and now the game was becoming heavier than she could have ever predicted. Matilde's life would never be the same again, nor would Jonathan's, Allison's, or the Green family's. The future, which had seemed promising at one point, was now filled with shadows, questions, and unexpected consequences. The birth of the conjoined twins was, without a doubt, a turning point in everyone's life. Matilde was exhausted, but at the same time, she felt a strange relief. The weight of keeping the secret, of living with the lies and the anxiety, had now dissipated. However, the reality was relentless. What she had thought was her chance at freedom was turning into an increasingly tight prison. In the days following the birth, the tension in the greenhouse increased. Allison, unable to cope with the pain of the betrayal and the public impact it had caused, began to withdraw. The marriage between her and Jonathan, already fragile, began to crumble irreparably. Meanwhile, Matilde tried to comprehend the depth of the consequences of her actions. She knew she was now at the center of a storm, and the pieces around her were being rearranged in ways she had never imagined. Jonathan, in turn, found himself in an even more delicate situation. The man who had always kept control, who always seemed to have everything in his hands, now found himself powerless in the face of a public scandal that threatened to destroy his reputation and ruin his family's life. He no longer knew who to trust. The woman he loved, the maid he thought he knew, the children arriving in an unforeseen and unexpected way. Nothing seemed right anymore. The only thing he was certain of was that his life had changed in an irreversible way. And it was when Jonathan went to the maternity ward, accompanied by Allison, to meet the children that Matilde was carrying. The moment he saw the boys, so fragile and helpless, was the turning point. He looked at the small, intertwined bodies, inseparable, and as difficult as it was, something awakened within him. The responsibility was no longer just about Matilde or his wife. It was about those two lives, which, though unplanned, were now a part of his existence. "They are our children, Jonathan," Allison said, her voice low but firm. "And, as painful as it is, we need to decide what to do about this." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes empty, but something seemed to have changed inside him. He knew that the decision they made now would forever alter everyone's life. There was something redemptive in that moment, something that, despite everything, seemed to offer a chance at rebuilding. In the days that followed, Matilde was called for a meeting with Jonathan and Allison. She knew this was the moment of truth, the moment when all her choices would be judged. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew there was no denying what had happened anymore. She no longer cared about the personal consequences. What more could she lose? Her life, her dignity, her future? They were all in ruins. Jonathan got straight to the point. "Matilde, you've put everything at risk. Our family, our image, our lives. But now, it's no longer about us. It's about the children. What do you expect to happen now?" Matilde, with a tight heart, felt a lump in her throat. She knew she couldn't blame anyone anymore. Everything was in her hands. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, spoke with the sincerity she had never dared to show. "I just want them to have a future, a chance. I didn't know what I was doing when this started, but now, it's too late. There's nothing more to be done." Allison looked at her with a penetrating gaze. She was sad, hurt, but she also knew the situation wasn't simple. She could see Matilde's inner struggle, the guilt, the regret, but also the determination of someone who knew their life had changed forever. "I understand that you thought this would be your way out, Matilde," Allison said, her voice breaking. "But you can't just use our lives to change yours. That's not how things work." The silence became heavy. Matilde felt small before them, but at the same time, she felt a weight being lifted from her shoulders. She knew her story, with all its lies and mistakes, would no longer be part of the game. She was being confronted, and perhaps, for the first time, she would be able to accept the consequences. Jonathan paused before continuing. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, as if accepting the reality. "We'll take care of them, Matilde. We won't abandon these children. But you also need to take responsibility. What happens to you, to your life, depends on the choices you make from now on. It's not what you planned, but now, it's what we have." And it was there, in that moment, that Matilde understood the true extent of everything she had done. The plan that had begun with a single desire for change had turned into something she couldn't control. But instead of being punished or rejected, she found a kind of redemption. Not the one she had expected, but the one that life, with its relentless force, offered her. Matilde decided to stay. She didn't know for how long, but she knew that, somehow, she would have to rebuild her life there, with Jonathan, Allison, and the twins. The shame and remorse still consumed her, but she was beginning to understand that true change wasn't in what she had done to others, but in what she would choose to do with the chances she still had. The price of her choices was high, but she was willing to pay it. The twins grew, and although Matilde's past continued to haunt her like a ghost, she found a way to move forward. The Green household would never be the same, but something new arose from the ashes. A new beginning. Not perfect, not without scars, but still a new beginning. And in the end, maybe that was what she needed to learn. That even in the most complicated situations, the dirtiest and bitterest ones, there was still the chance of a second chance. Of renewal. Not perfection, but the possibility of starting over. Even if there was a price to pay.